Most of the world remembers Ernest Hemingway as the ultimate man's man, a titan of literature who survived plane crashes, war zones, and charging bulls. He was the gold standard of masculine strength. But when the sun rose over Ketchum, Idaho, in 1961, that image shattered. Because this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a repeat. 5 family members, 3 generations, all ending in the exact same room, with the exact same silence. How does a family that taught the world how to speak lose the ability to ask for help? Is it a curse written in the DNA or a lesson learned in the dark? This is the untold true story of a legacy built on words and destroyed by everything that was left unsaid. And it all started with a father who couldn't find the words either. Before the myth, there was Clarence, a respected physician, a man trained to heal the world. But Clarence Hemingway carried a secret that medicine couldn't touch. Behind the polished exterior of a suburban doctor lived a man drowning in a crushing depression he wasn't allowed to name. In the Hemingway house, discipline was the only language spoken. Weakness wasn't just a failure, it was a betrayal. In 1928, Clarence walked into a room and pulled a trigger. He didn't leave a note. In the Hemingway world, you don't explain. The family didn't mourn Clarence through therapy or conversation. They absorbed him. They took his silence and turned it into a foundation. For his young son, Ernest, the lesson was permanent. Pain wasn't something you shared. It was something you conquered, or you died trying. Ernest decided right then he would never be like his father. He would be stronger, louder, more alive than anyone else on earth. But the very things he used to outrun the shadow were the things that would eventually lead him right back to it. Ernest Hemingway didn't just write books. He built a monument. He created the Hemingway hero, a man who bleeds in silence, a man who faces death with grace under pressure. The world fell in love with the legend. We wanted to be him. We wanted his courage. But the monument was cracking. Years of concussions, plane crashes, and chronic pain were taking their toll. The alcohol, which once felt like a companion, had become a necessity. By his 50s, the man who lived for the thrill of the hunt found himself being hunted. By his own mind, the doctor suggested shock therapy. Dozens of sessions. They were trying to reset his brain, but they ended up erasing his greatest weapon, his memory. His sentences were vanishing. The man who lived by words was losing them. On that quiet morning in 1961, Ernest realized he had become a prisoner of the very code he had created, and he decided there was only one way to honor the legend. But what Ernest didn't know was that he wasn't just ending his own story. He was handing the gun to the next generation. A decade later, a new Hemingway arrived. Margaux, she was Hemingway famous, tall, blonde, breathtaking. She wasn't a writer. She was a masterpiece, the world's first million-dollar supermodel. To the public, she was the escape. She was the proof that the Hemingway bloodline had finally found the light. But fame didn't lighten the weight of her surname. It amplified it. Margaux wasn't allowed to be sad. She wasn't allowed to be unstable. She had to be a monument, just like her grandfather. She drank like Ernest. She spiraled like Ernest. And quietly, she began to suffer just like him. The pattern didn't care about the fame. It didn't care about the beauty. It was a silent hum in the background of her life, waiting for its moment to speak. Why did it keep happening? Modern science looks at the Hemingways and sees bipolar disorder and genetic depression. But biology is only half the story. The other half is the architecture of silence. In this family, you didn't talk about weakness. You didn't ask for help. Suicide wasn't framed as a preventable tragedy. It was framed as an inevitability. It was just what Hemingways did when the world got too heavy. Genetics loaded the gun, but the environment showed them where it was kept. Margaux was living in a house where the walls were built out of the things nobody would say, and as her career began to fade in the 90 seconds, the walls began to close in. By 1996, the it girl was alone. Her health was collapsing. The fame was a ghost. On February 1st, she was found in her apartment. The headlines called it an overdose, but the family knew the truth. She died on the exact anniversary of Ernest Hemingway's death. The same day, the same family, the same silence. 5 close family members were now gone. At that point, the world stopped calling it a tragedy. They started calling it a curse. It felt like a dark, supernatural force was pulling the strings, like the Hemingways were destined to break. But while the world watched the curse unfold, one person was watching from the inside, and she decided she wasn't going to be the next anniversary. Mariel Hemingway, Margaux's sister, Ernest's other granddaughter. She grew up in the same house. She carried the same DNA. She felt the same shadow. But Mariel did something no Hemingway had ever done before. She spoke. She admitted she was scared. She admitted she was depressed. She treated mental health like maintenance, not like shame. She realized that the Hemingway code of strength through silence was actually a death sentence. She began to draw a map, not just for herself, but for anyone trapped in a pattern they didn't ask for. The tragedy of the Hemingways isn't about genius. It's about opportunity. The opportunity to name the danger. We romanticized their suffering for so long. We called it the tortured artist myth. We turned their pain into an aesthetic. But destruction was never their destiny. It was a choice made in the absence of other options. Mariel proved that the bloodline isn't a prison. You can inherit the risk, but you don't have to inherit the ending. So, what is the Hemingway pattern really? It's a reminder that endurance is not the same thing as strength. True strength isn't bleeding in silence. True strength is the courage to be weak. It's the bravery to say, I'm not okay. The story of this family doesn't end with a shotgun in 1961. It doesn't end in a Santa Monica apartment in 1996. It ends with a choice to break the cycle, to tell the truth, to stop the repetition. The Hemingways taught us how to write, but their lives taught us how to survive. They showed us that the stories we tell ourselves about who we have to be are often the very things that destroy us. Your legacy isn't fixed in your blood. It's fixed in your honesty. Now I have to ask you, have you ever felt the weight of a family pattern? Do you believe we are destined to repeat the mistakes of our parents? Or do we truly have the power to write a different ending? Let me know in the comments. I read every one of them. But the Hemingways weren't the only ones living under a shadow. In the heart of Hollywood, another icon was fighting a battle so secret, it would take decades for the truth to surface. Click here to see the story of the man the world thought had everything, until the silence finally caught up to him.